Hello, and welcome to Down the Garden Path, where we discuss down-to-earth tips and advice while doing our best to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. I'm Joanne Shaw, owner of Down to Earth Landscape Design, and with me is my co-host Matthew Dressing. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Joanne, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us. I'm Matthew Dressing, owner of Natural Affinity Garden Design. As landscape designers and gardeners, we believe it's important and possible to have great gardens, which are sustainable and low maintenance, and we want to help you make it happen.
That's right. And tonight, as we continue February's theme of houseplants, on this Valentine's Day evening, we're joined by author Marianne Willburn to discuss her new book, Tropical Plants and How to Love Them. So if you have a question for Marianne about her book, send questions to instudio101@gmail.com.
And just before we welcome Mary Ann to the show, let me tell you a little bit about Mary Ann. Marianne Willburn is a garden columnist, speaker, and author of Big Dreams, Small Garden. A writer at GardenRant and a regular contributor to Better Homes and Gardens, The American Gardener, and other national gardening blogs and magazines, Marianne has also been a Mid-Atlantic newspaper columnist for over a decade and is the recipient of several silver and gold media awards from Garden Communicators International for her column. She gardens in a rural corner of Northern Virginia, working with an ever-evolving mixture of tropical, temperate, and native plants, and shares her gardening life each week on www.smalltowngardener.com. Welcome to the show, Marianne.
Thank you, Matthew. It's great to be with you. Thanks a lot. It's good to meet you both.
Oh, great. Well, we're excited to talk tropical plants and we dedicate a whole month to house plants. But this is exciting because now we get to talk about tropical plants being used outside, right?
Yes, and I love the fact that this is actually going to be on Valentine's Day. That just makes me giggle since it's about loving those tropical plants.
Exactly. So why don't we start about defining tropical plants? What makes a plant tropical or not tropical, just for our
Absolutely.
listeners?
Well, the book is titled Tropical Plants and How to Love Them. However, it really should be tropical and subtropical plants and how to love them. But, there's only so much you can put on a book cover because a lot of the plants that we use are actually subtropical plants. And these plants come from those regions of our globe of our planet that are in the tropical regions. That's on both sides of the equator, and it's around, and you're going to about 23 degrees on both sides of the equator. They're native to that region. Subtropical plants are native to anything up to about 35, and we are as temperate gardeners about 35 to 50, and then that's that, so it's all a question of where these plants are native to. And that's all the way around the globe, not just in one country or another country. But the tropical plants, they have the same sort of day length. There are tropical plants that have more moisture in their area because of prevailing winds and weather patterns and elevation and that type of thing. But overall, they have a pretty steady life of even day and night times, even temperatures. Subtropical plants have I wouldn't want to say much more variation, but they have more variation in day length, in seasonal changes. They also can occasionally suffer from frost. Whereas tropical plants do not, as we're seeing in Texas for right now. They're going, wait a minute, we're subtropical here. So those plants we tend to work with as temperate gardeners a lot more, even because they give us a little bit more flexibility too. And many of them want to have a dormancy period, if not full dormancy, then partial dormancy. So we work with all of those things and bringing them into a temperate climate has its challenges, but it can be exciting and it's different. And as temperate gardeners, we have so much more ability to work with both types of plants because we can build the heat even artificially and put those plants in, whereas it's really difficult to grow a lilac in Florida. In fact, it's pretty much impossible. So we actually get to have the best of both worlds in temperate climates.
Ooh,
Very-
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yes. So in your book, you have these relationship categories with us and our tropical and subtropical plants. Can you speak to the different relationships?
Yes, absolutely. This it sounds gimmicky. I know that, but it isn't. It actually allows people to categorize these plants and keep them to memory in terms of how they're stored and how we use them. And it started out from talks that I was giving to people on the tropical and subtropical plants that I grew. And I would see in people's eyes sort of understanding, oh, wait a minute, you mean I don't have to bring that banana into my living room over the winter? I can put it into storage, into dormant storage, and I don't have to have lights on it? Or wait a minute, you mean that can go into my cold garage with just a bulb over it, but it's 50 degrees and it's fine? Whereas people would think, oh, I've got to bring these all of them just into my house and live with them. So that's why I sort of categorize these plants into these relationship categories. And the very first one is our summer romances. And those are just as they sound. Those are the plants that we buy in a moment's excitement and passion, and they stay with us all season long, all that growing season, until we can't have any more fun with them, and then we say, okay, it's done, it's over, um, and maybe next year, but I'm not storing you, and off to the compost with you. And that is okay because plants die, and it's okay. And we do that with so many other plants in our lives.
Mhm.
It's okay to do that with some tropicals. So that's our summer romance plants. Our best friend plants are those plants, and I call them best friends because they give us so much in the garden. Just that they give us so much architecture, color, form, shape. Um, and then we can, and they ask for so little in terms of storage in the winter. So we can put those into a dormant storage. These are things like dahlias, cannas, gingers, bananas, Dioscorea, uh, Ruellia, those type of plants. You can put these into storage, and they don't need to have light on them. They just need to be kept above freezing. And that's anywhere between, let's say, 35 and 45 Fahrenheit, about 2 to 7 Celsius. And they're fine. You check on them, make sure they're not desiccated, make sure they're not too wet. And in the springtime, you start to pot them back up, build up heat, get them into a cold frame, and then get them back out in the garden. And those are best friend plants. Our long-term commitment plants are just as they sound. Those are those wonderful plants. I've got a philodendron sitting right next to me here.
Mhm.
These
Yes, and it's beautiful.
strong, beautiful plants that have somehow adapted to the dry conditions of our houses in the winter, and they do well. We're not showing pity on them by keeping them in our house. They actually add to our decor. The Scheffleras, the Dracaenas, the Sansevierias. And I'm talking in Latin. I can also talk in common names too. Those are the snake plants and the umbrella plants, that type of thing, and the philodendron. And those plants are house plants, but they can be outdoors plants too. And this is a real revelation for people, that you can take those house plants and they can live outside and they can make your outside space look amazing too. and do fun things. Like you can have Dracaena coming up from a big bed of ferns because you just plunge that pot into those ferns. And then in the fall, you take that up and you put it in your house and it makes the corner come alive. So that's why they're called long-term commitments, because they're with us. They're with us until we say no, or they say no at some point. Our high maintenance partners are exactly as they sound. those, those are those beautiful, fantastic, just, oh my goodness, they get the juices flowing. You want to get your hands on them. And then they ask a lot from and you know what? You're okay with it for a while, right? Just like high maintenance partners in real life, you're like, yeah, this is okay. All right, okay, because I'm really in love. And then you're like, yeah, I'm so done. This is I can't do this anymore. I'm the spider mite, the this, the that. You don't even look good in this place in the corner anymore. These are the house. We bring them into the house. We give them special care, and perhaps they don't look so great. So we want to keep them in a back corner. So we have those until we're finally finished with them, and that's why I call them the high maintenance partners. Those are not bad plants. They're fabulous plants, and they teach us a great deal about how to control humidity and how to balance temperature with heat, temperature with light, and temperature with water, and all of those things that they actually make us better gardeners. So everybody should have one or two of those in our lives, even if you have to keep them in a corner over the winter, put it an area where people can't see them. And then my last category is one that's just for fun, and that's friends with benefits, and those are the tropical and the subtropical plants that we can eat, that make wonderful additions to some of our favorite dishes. And that's everything from macroot lime, the leaves on a macroot lime that go to flavor a curry, to ginger. I love to grow regular grocery store ginger, because I can only get it to a certain point by the end of my season in terms of how mature that bulb is, but it's at the perfect point to be able to slice it thinly and pickle it to make the sushi ginger that I adore, the pickled ginger that you put on there. That's young ginger, and you can't really find it in the markets. But you can find it, already pickled, but I can make it fresh. So it's things like that. That's what's in Friends with Benefits. And that's just a little bit extra to have fun with. So that gives you a good enough. Does that give you a good rundown, Matthew?
That's a great rundown. And honestly, after hearing you talk about them and describe them and reading it in your book, and you go into great detail, you have sections for each of those relationships, which go into great detail about them. It really makes me think about houseplants in a completely different way. Just like you had said before, I think we were talking before the show, just we like to compartmentalize things as we kind of categorize things in our brain. And yeah, that gives you just a whole new perspective on how what your relationship is with them, and how to use them. And yeah, it's very interesting in depth too.
And it's important also to say that these are my guidelines for readers. This is not putting this down in stone.
Yes.
So for one person's long-term commitment might be, or say a high maintenance partner, maybe another very, very skilled gardener's long-term commitment who has learned to treat that plant so fabulously and so perfectly that it looks like $1 million in their living room, but it takes care. So these things are they're fairly they're somewhat fluid, and that they also change depending on what's going on in your life. So I may take in 100 cannas every year. I don't take in that many, but it feels like it by the springtime. I may take those in, and then one fall I have a incredibly busy fall, and I've got to treat them all like summer romances and say, you know what, I can't dig them this year,
Mm.
or I can only dig 2 or 3. So again, it's fluid. It depends on, and it depends also if you like a plant or not. You may
Yes.
suddenly decide, you know what, I
Eh,
I don't, meh, you know.
Yeah. Is it worth the
Or
effort, right? Like, yeah, at some point you're like, depending on how much you love it, just like our outdoor plants, right? Gardeners are always digging out plants that they kind of were like, now you're 3 years in. I'm like, this Magelia can go, that type of thing,
agreed. And they
mhm.
depend on us. These tropical plants and subtropical plants do depend on us a great deal more than maybe that Weigela. So, the decision is maybe a little easier to make. Like, I just don't want to go to that trouble this year. And so I think if people can continue to see them that way, that it doesn't always have to be the same year to year, they're
mhm.
much more likely to use the plants.
Mhm.
And that again is the reason for the categories, because I want people to experiment. I want people to dabble. And I don't want them to feel like I'm buying this and now you and I are locked in wedded bliss for the rest of our lives. And I hate you and, and I don't want to deal with you anymore. I don't want people to feel like that about a plant. I want them to keep it, keep it fun.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I just was saying it also, you've caught me thinking outside the box, because as we were talking about before the show, I love houseplants and tropical plants, but I've always just used them in containers. And then I have experimented with bringing them in the house or putting them in the garage. But it kind of, reading the book, it kind of was like this, like, wow, of like putting them in the gardens. And because so many houseplants are so really interesting and architectural, or tropical plants, I want to specify that. So putting it in, so I love that part of the book, and I love that it's helping me think outside the box.
Well, that actually makes me want to go into a little bit about that idea of using those houseplants in the garden, because as they are already in containers, it can make them very easy if you're plunging them into certain parts of your garden. Like I said, with the Dracaena, going into a bed of ferns and creating something really exciting. But we do have to be very careful when we're making those transitions, both outside and back inside. And the transition outside is, most of it is about sunlight.
Okay.
And how sunburnt a plant can get in 24 hours. And, and some of these plants have leaves that take a long time to unfurl, that are pretty sturdy, and it can take them a very long time to get over a serious sun scald. Almost all seasons, sometimes it can kill the plant. So we need to be really, really careful when we're bringing them out. So what I advise people to do is, when it is definitely warm enough, when your temperatures are not going down below 50 at night, about 10 centigrade or Celsius, then you can start thinking about bringing them out, bringing them into a sheltered location that does not get direct sun. And I put all of mine together, long-term commitments, high maintenance partners, etc., all together in an area that is very shaded. It's near the hose, so I can start, ramping up the hydration that they're getting. They're getting warmer because obviously the air is warmer. They're getting used to that nighttime temperature, but they're not having to deal with that direct sunlight. And then I slowly move them over to some area. They get a little bit of early morning sun, which is absolutely perfect. And then I move them over into, very slowly, into a little bit more direct sun. Some of these house plants, they are absolutely equipped to be in a shady patio, or like a little nook in that difficult place that it's hard to put all of those sun-loving annuals. Your house plants might really love that, because it does usually get some ambient light. But some of these plants are made for the sun and are happy to get into the sun. They just have to do it a little bit slowly. I would do it over a couple week period. Don't move too fast. You will regret it. And whether that's your prize peperomia or your super tall prize ficus lyrata, you can cause some serious harm if you don't move slowly.
As you mentioned, putting them out into that lower light to full shade kind of area, how long are we leaving them in those conditions before those leaves adapt and we can move them out into like possibly higher light locations?
Yeah, it's actually shorter than you think. Usually I'm doing this over a 2-week period. I've got 2 different areas where I've got one it's not deep shade. It's like I said, it gets some early morning sun, and that's where they start out, but it's dappled shade from trees above otherwise during the day. And then they go over into an area on my deck that gets that first full part of the morning sun all the way up until about 12, until the sun starts getting hotter, and they sit there for about a week, and then I can move them into other areas. But if we have a hot spell around that time, like a real heat wave, I will still go out there with a sheet on a couple of my big guys, like my fiddle-leaf fig, my big Schefflera umbrella plant, and I'll throw a sheet over the top of them at around 1 o'clock in the afternoon for a couple days.
Okay.
Just to, it's not a lot more than you're doing for other plants that you're bringing outside.
Yeah.
That you're basically hardening them off is what you're doing, just as you would with small vegetables.
Yeah, and as you say sheet, you're just thinking like, are you thinking something thick like a towel, or just thin like a bed sheet just to break the sun kind of thing? Okay,
that's exactly right.
That's very much.
And a fitted sheet is the best because it just, it goes over the top of them and it clings to them, right? So it's the best.
Except when you have to refold the fitted sheet, but that's a whole other show.
Yeah. That's a Martha Stewart YouTube video.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Well, and we have equal things on the other side too, bringing them back in. And I don't know, or bringing them back into the house. Do you want to go through that a little bit?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so we've kind of taken them out and there are stages to take them out. What about bringing them back for the winter?
Yeah, because this is one of the places that people also mess up.
Yes.
And it's because they look so great out there. And say you've got this deck that's filled with all of your beautiful house plants, and you've got other plants out there too. And the real heat of the summer is over, and you're just enjoying yourself and your friends out on the deck, and everything looks beautiful, and it's getting cooler at night, and that's sort of fun. And you bring out the chimenea, and now you're having fires. Well, even though your plants are coping with this, the nights are getting cooler, and they are starting to shut down a lot of processes. Their metabolism is changing. And so ironically, even though it's beautiful and you want people out there, that's the time that you really need to be bringing them inside.
Yeah.
Before, you can't be doing this like, oh, there's a hard freeze tonight. Let's get all these guys in. Now, we all do that.
Yeah.
I do it. There's always, mea culpa. But ideally, if you don't want the plant to drop a lot of leaves when it comes in, and you want it to be a smooth, easy transition that really takes advantage of how beautiful that plant has grown over the season, then it makes much more sense to, when the temperatures are starting to mirror the temperatures that are in your house, so that, and again, you're not dropping back down into the high 40s. A lot of those plants can totally cope with it, but you want to bring them in. You want to make that transition like it's almost a no transition for them.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
That just makes it easier for them. And then again, you're taking advantage of all that beauty during the season, because that was something that I wanted to mention, was that we bring them outside, not just because we're cheap and we need to fill space with plants, and that could be one of the things, but because they respond so beautifully to those summer temperatures, to that extra hydration, to the extra fertilization that we often give them, to so a lot of plants that are variegated just come alive with the color.
Yes.
Well, when that sun is on them. Um, and like peperomia is really strong in my head for that. I had this little peperonia for, oh, I don't know, 3-4 years in the house, looking fine, but nothing to write home about. And I finally took it outside one summer and it just came alive. It hadn't looked that good since I brought it home that first day. It had
Oh, wow.
just slowly lost a lot of its color.
Mhm.
And, so that's why we're taking them outside. We are giving them a summer vacation. They need it. We need it. And it gives you a chance to clean house, to
Mm.
to be able to dust underneath those saucers. And
Yeah. Yeah. Now, question, do you always keep them in the pot? Like, is there ever a situation where you take them out of their pot and put them in the garden?
yeah, absolutely. I like to, if I can. Now, if we're talking about the long-term commitments, the house plants, I like to do my repotting in the early spring, and keep them in whatever pot they're gonna come back into the house in. And if I need to,
Okay.
pop that pot up, I like to do that in the spring. You can do it in the fall, but again, we're trying to give them their best chance of success. And messing with the roots in the fall, just before they
Mm.
come back in, it's already traumatic. You're making it more traumatic.
Okay.
Like I said, you can do it. I've got a
Mhm.
big Scheffler right now that's lost a few leaves, but it's alive and happy. Um, but I do that in the spring. Now, if I'm putting them into garden beds, a lot of times what I do is I just plunge the pot into a dug hole for
Okay.
it. That stabilizes it. It's hidden by other foliage around it, and it makes it super easy to pop it up and put it into the house. Sometimes I will take them out of their pots, but that mostly has to do when I'm creating combinations. I do this a lot with snake plant, with Sansevieria. I love those vertical accents. I love them
Mhm.
so much more than cordyline,
Mm.
the ubiquitous cordyline
Yeah.
thriller that everybody has. I
Yes.
love Sansevieria. It is, and there's so many colors. And so I can pick up on the grays in a pot, or I can pick up on
Mhm.
the yellows in a pot.
Yeah.
And it is so forgiving that I can take a big chunk of it and just put it into a pot like I would any other, uh, plant combination, and it does great. And then in the fall, I can pull it out, stick it in another pot, and it'll be just fine to come back into
Oh,
the
good.
house. So
Okay.
yeah, yes, I absolutely do that. And of course, I very much do it with uh,
Mhm.
the bigger plants that go into cold storage.
Okay. It's great. Yeah, it's a good idea. I can see that. And one thing that struck me is that with the economies these days and housing, there's a lot of, and I see it in a lot of the Facebook groups, right? There's a lot of people who love plants, but they're renters. And and the thought of leaving their plant, like spending money, they want a gorgeous garden but then leaving it behind. And I know and there's been some landscape designers and the summer where that they built these beautiful gardens and then needed to, the homeowner was selling the house and they needed to leave. So I think this is great for people to really think about that you can have the best of both worlds, and that when it does come time for you to move, it's much easier to take your plants with you. And because they're the indoor and outdoor plants. So I just, yeah, I think that's great. And it's a good thing for people to know that you can really invest in some really interesting pieces for your home and your yard that you can quote unquote easily take with you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's actually a caveat, right, Joanne?
Yes.
Is easily with a dolly and four
Yeah.
men. No, I'm
That's
kidding.
right.
So,
But easier than a Japanese maple, right? Or easier
oh,
than, easier than those, when you think of the poppies or the peonies, often peonies are asked of us because, they tend to be passed down in families, right? So that tends to be a prized plant in many people's gardens. This was my grandmother's, oh no, we're moving in November and my grandmother's peonies. Like, what do I do? So
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, these are you there's a lot, these plants give you a lot of flexibility. And having rented for a very long time
Mhm.
myself, I understand that feeling. And actually I go into it in my book Big Dream Small Garden, the book I wrote before this one, about those challenges that you have when you're renting. And you're right. These plants fulfill both those things. They can make the inside of your house, which can be a little drab, and maybe you don't want to put all of that money into fixing up somebody else's house.
Mhm.
Um, but with some really beautiful specimen plants, you can do some miraculous things inside and outside.
Yeah. That's great.
So in the book, just speaking about people, new homes and people getting excited, these new plant parents, you have in your book a message to frugal gardeners. What what's your message to frugal gardeners?
Well, first off, I'm frugal myself. And that's really important because I think a lot of times readers uh, of a book will go, okay, this is all well and good, but this is how
Mhm.
I feel about it.
Yeah.
And I want people to understand two things about this book from the beginning. A, I am a cheapskate. I always have been. Okay, so I'm approaching it from that way. And two, I didn't start out adoring tropical plants the way that
Mhm.
I love them now. I didn't start out obsessed with them in special Facebook groups, obsessed by them, in dark corners of plant society meetings talking about them. I was sort of, um, I don't want to say meh about them, but this had a lot to do with what was available to us as a temperate gardener. And you'd see sort of a ratty looking canna, three or
Mhm.
four cannas, especially the Tropicana cannas, which were really big for a little bit.
Mhm.
And they're the people who are the nursery, usually the big boxes, aren't really taking care of them so that they look
Mhm.
dry and
Yeah.
you know how that goes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you think, well, why would I want that in my garden? What, and that was my real thought process. And then I was fortunate enough, being down in North Carolina with some friends, to see a few gardens that were incorporating tropical accents in their temperate gardens. Because the other issue with tropical plants that most people think about is, well, I don't want a tropical garden. A, I don't
Mm.
want all that work. B,
Mhm.
it's all nice in Jurassic Park, but that's not really the way that I want a
Yes.
garden.
Yeah.
Um, and what I advocate for and what I fell in love with was the idea of fusing these two
Mm. Mhm.
gardens. The temperate garden is your overwhelming theme. The tropical accent is your punch. It's
Mhm.
your excitement. It's your surprise. At the end of a long walk or in a little corner. It doesn't have to be the whole theme. And so once I started thinking about it that way, I was absolutely hooked. Because there is nothing more fun than having a non-gardener come into your garden and be going through it, and they're like, la la la, this is all nice, haha. And then, is that a banana? That's a
Uh-huh.
banana, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can we grow bananas? And they're like, yeah, now let's talk about our garden. Now that
Yes.
you've seen this banana. Um, so those are the two places I want people to know that I come from. That I really looked askance at tropical plants, and so this is written with all you cynics and skeptics in mind. And I also don't like to spend huge amounts of money on plants. I certainly, when a plant is really worthwhile, I will certainly save up and get it. But I use a lot of cuttings. I like to do a lot of my own propagation. I grow a lot of things from seeds, but I grow a lot of tropical plants and subtropical plants from seeds. One of the biggest bangs for your buck you can get as a frugal gardener is to grow castor bean, ricinus,
Ah.
Oh, yes.
which is an incredible plant.
Mhm.
Texture, color, statement making. Now, I will put a caveat in there. It is a poisonous plant. All
Yeah.
parts of it are poisonous, but there are other parts. There are other plants in our gardens which are just as poisonous, i.e., foxglove.
Right.
Very poisonous, right? But we've
Monkshood.
gotten used to
Yeah.
so it's important to have that in mind. But that's just one thing that you can grow from seed. And I tend to put in little seeds, and I have a long list in the book of tropical plants that you can grow from seed.
You do.
That are fantastic. You want to be giving them a lot of warmth, usually much more warmth in germination than you normally do, and keeping them moist and you're good to go. And they take off. So you got to stay on top of that potting up, and getting them outside. But yes, that's a good thing for frugal gardeners. And because so many of these can be stored without too much trouble, like you don't have to have an expensive greenhouse to do this. You can use a corner of your dirt basement, which I did for many years because I didn't have a garage. I didn't even have a proper floor in my basement. It was, it was an 1890s house. So they were
Ooh.
shoved way back in a deep, dark corner in bags. So you don't have to have all the things that you think you might need to have. And if you get more obsessed, by all means, I have just, for the first time in my 25 years of gardening, bought a greenhouse. So that's an undiscovered country for this gardener, and I'll be trying to work with that next year. And I have a feeling I'll probably be going back to some of my own methods when I get fed up with sizzling my plants to death, But but yeah, you can do this as a frugal gardener. Yeah, absolutely you can.
Exciting.
Very nice. I'm going to jump in just as we get halfway through the show. We're passing by there. I'm just going to say thank you, everyone, for who's tuning in live this Valentine's Day evening to us here on Reality Radio 101. I'm Matthew Dressing here with my co-host Joanne Shaw, and you're listening to Down the Garden Path. Joanne and I enjoy hosting Down the Garden Path each week, bringing you interesting and relevant topics to help you achieve a great garden. We learn right along with you from our research and from the wonderful guests like Marianne Willburn, who join us here on the show. Don't forget, you can spend more time with us down the garden path. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Our handle there is at Down the Garden Path Podcast. You can find us also on all of your favorite podcast providers, lots of past episodes and great topics. And while you're there, please hit that subscribe button to be notified of new content. And please don't forget to like, share, and leave us a comment. We love hearing from you. You can always write us, or you can also write our wonderful guest this evening, Marianne Willburn, here at instudio101@gmail.com. As you probably all have heard, or if you're just joining us later in the show, we are doing a pre-record this Valentine's Day evening, and we will forward all of our mail. Our wonderful producer, Gary, gives us all of our mail, and we will make sure that Marianne gets your questions, and we all get back to you regarding your questions on tonight's wonderful topic. You can also find Joanne and I at online. You can find Joanne at www.down2earth.ca, and you can find myself at naturalaffinity.ca.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. We love our little mini commercial for ourselves, right? Everybody know how to find us. And we will have all of Marianne's contact information in our show notes as well for you. So Marianne, I wanted to talk a little bit about, you mentioned about bringing them in and where they should go when we bring the house plants or the tropical plants in. But sometimes it doesn't go as smooth, right? Sometimes people are afraid of it because what happens if there is an issue with insects and disease, that type of thing. And I know in Canada, we have limited resources. There's a little bit more control over the insecticides or pesticides that we could use. But you highlight a few of those, options as well, right? Some IPM structure, some advice that you have in your book. So did you want to, cover some of the ones that that you maybe experienced or that are more common?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I go into pretty great detail about using horticultural soap and horticultural oil in the treatment of plants. I don't really go into chemicals too much, besides just to say if it gets really, really, really bad, you can look down other options. But really, I am a user of hort soap and hort oil, and my mantra on this is really don't let it get bad. Always be checking those plants. And that goes back to what I had forgotten to talk about with bringing them back inside is, paying attention to those temperatures. But a couple weeks before you're thinking, they're probably going to need to come back in a couple weeks. For me, that's usually sort of realistically beginning mid September. I'm thinking
Okay.
they're going to need to be in, by the third week of September if I'm doing it right. And so a couple weeks before that, I check the plants that are going to be coming in, check them all over for pests and see what we're dealing with. I treat them at that time, and I treat them with hort soap and hort with a spray of hort oil too, because it's so easy when they're outside. We can be sitting there getting all soaped up together, and there's no furniture to ruin or floors to ruin. It's really easy. I've got the hose, so I do that a couple weeks before, and then I do it a week before. Again,
Okay.
is there because some of these things are hiding, and then if I've still got a real problem and I need to bring them in, usually I don't. Like I remember one ficus that I had that had a black um, scale on it that I had never seen before, that was very, very large scale. And I had brought this plant in. It had been given to me by somebody who should know better.
Ah.
And I'm not going to mention any names. But I had been battling this scale and I could not get rid of it. And I even bare rooted the plant, put it back in fresh soil, and I still couldn't get rid of it. It would come back. So this is where that checking on it. I'd been aware of the problem all season.
Right.
And that those last couple weeks before I brought it in, I thought, you know what? Right now it is on this plant. But I have and I can't see it right now, but it keeps coming back. And if I bring it inside, I'm going to put it on every plant that that like is one of the menu items for scale. So I didn't bring it in. I mean, those are choices to be made. That's pretty rare though. If I have a very bad mealybug problem on a plant, I will really think hard about whether or not that plant needs to come back inside. Is it much more like, say it's an alocasia. And alocasias are an elephant ear that if they're given their druthers, they would rather stay in the green. They would rather come into the house and be treated like a house plant. They may or may not be as attractive as you would like them to be. But unlike colocasia, which goes fully dormant easily, alocasia, you really have to fight and say, no, you are going to bed, go to bed. So if I brought an alocasia in and it had some mealybug on it and I couldn't get rid of that mealybug, that has a potential for getting worse and worse and worse. And so it would make much more sense to completely cut it back, force it into dormancy, and change the soil and do all of those things, but don't bring that inside.
Okay.
So it's just something that you really need to be very aware of during your season, how your plants are progressing. And like I say it in the book, talking about dealing with the Schefflera in February with scale. Don't let it get that bad, so that you touch you touch your sofa and it's sticky.
Yeah. Oh.
Now
Yeah.
that's odd. Now why is that? That's because you haven't been putting your reading glasses on and looking at your plants,
That's
Marianne.
right. That is right.
So it just staying on top of it, I think, is really the best thing. And if you've after a few years of experience with plants, going down this gardening path long
Mhm.
enough, you start to have a good idea of what could continue to be a bad problem. Aphids, you'll probably be able to cope with very
Yeah.
easily. Mealybug,
Mhm.
you might have a little bit more trouble on an organic level.
Yeah.
Um,
It looks
Dealing
so
with
innocuous, doesn't it? Like in a way. I mean, I've struggled with it. I had 3 beautiful prized orchids and I bought another one impulse purchase from a big box store and boy did it affected all of them and I brought them outside. So that was inside and then I brought them outside and I didn't do horticultural oil though. I just did um I think insecticidal soap and I tried a whole bunch of different things. Like you said, like, I thought being outside now in the air, like go away, mealybug, fly away, kind of thing. And I just couldn't do it. I tried the, rubbing alcohol and cotton ball and it would disappear from the plant. It looked like you got it, like it looked like you won. And then 2 weeks later, it's like poof, it's back. So and I had to throw all 4 away, and I was so sad.
Yeah,
And
and you're reminding me actually, Joanne, especially with mealybug, these critters hide on plants or
mm,
pots, and
oh,
they
okay.
hide on 100%, and they hide on um, accessories you might have in the pots. Like you
Oh,
might have
okay.
a cute little topiary thing in there or
Yes.
something, and they will be all over that. And you
Okay.
don't even sometimes I actually there's a picture in the book from a plant that was outside that had a large iron, some cha-cha thing that I had in
Hmm.
there, just outlined in mealybug. I mean, I could lose my gardener's license over that. um, but I think people don't think about
Oh,
the
yeah.
pots that they're in. You turn
Yeah.
that pot upside down, look underneath that pot.
Oh, yeah.
Look around the edge, up underneath the edge of the plant and of the plant pot, and wipe those down really, really well. And if you have a severe infestation, it's really best to change that pot out,
Okay.
not do too much root damage. But these are things you all know. You guys are
Yeah.
professionals. But aphids, like I said, it's not as big of a deal. Mealybug, you're gonna want to shoot yourself, kill the
Hmm.
plant,
Oh
burn the
yeah.
house
Hmm.
down.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my
I
goodness.
I I saw that you had the little finial there,
Yes.
and I honestly, because I just looking at it, it's like, oh yeah, and look, there's like you can see the little webbing, and I guess it's not as fine in the picture, so it might have been just like a normal spider maybe that went over it, because it looks. So I was like, oh yeah, look, she's a little finial, and there's some spider mites crawling around, or was moving between things, and then you just said mealybug, and then I looked at it again. I thought, oh, I thought that was the natural rusting or the paint on it. It looks
Yeah.
like
Yeah, me
detailed,
too,
like it's
Matthew.
aged. I was like, "Oh my goodness."
Yeah, it was rustic.
Oh, yes. I see that now too. Oh my goodness. Well, and I think about that with orchids because yeah, the orchids usually have the stake, like as much as I must have cleaned the plant and the pot, I'm pretty sure. But if it was on like, because often there was a little stake in the orchid plant with like the little,
Little
little
clip.
clip
Yeah.
and stuff. So if anything was hiding, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
so those are things to think about,
Hmm.
but they should not stop people from bringing them in, and
Yeah.
Mhm.
bringing in houseplants or
Hmm.
I'm sorry, bringing their houseplants outdoors,
Right.
because I am always just so surprised when I meet people who go, "Oh, you wouldn't want to do that. You'd bring pests in," and I think. Are you telling me you've got houseplants and you don't have pests and
Hmm.
you
That's
never have
true.
pests? I
Yeah.
mean, you've got plants, you've got pests. It's a question of keeping that very balanced,
Hmm.
and not letting it turn into an infestation. And the
Yeah.
plants, your instincts are 100% right, Joanne, to get that plant outside, and let some of nature take over too.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's predators outside
Hmm.
that love to eat those aphids. Um, there's just increased ventilation makes a big difference. all these different things.
Yeah.
Spider might love dry air.
Mm.
That's why I would never grow a banana in the green in my house, because within a month it will look terrible with spider mite.
Mm.
Uh,
Okay.
and why do it when I can cut all the leaves off, put the roots into a bag, and put it into my garage, and not
Wow.
pay any attention to it until I need to bring it back out again in the spring.
Wow. So how quickly would that leaf out again then when you brought it back out in the spring?
It's actually pretty remarkable.
Really?
There is a couple pages in the book about bananas, and I go into detail about the red Abyssinian banana, which is as an Anseti, not a Musa, and they look, let's say, rough. I think that's a little rough. I'd say for the first 3 to 4 weeks. Oh no, that's too long. I'd say about the first 3 weeks. Um, and then they're putting on new foliage fast. And by June in my climate, probably just a little bit later in June for you guys, you've got a plant that's making a significant contribution to the garden. By
Wow.
July, you've got a plant that is the garden. It's, so
Wow.
beautiful. It's extraordinary how quickly they go from looking um, rough. And you know what? That's all in the book. The book
Yes.
is not
Okay.
just about pretty. It's not just about pretty. Oh, look, pretty. Look at this
Right.
beautiful banana. It shows you those poor scalped creatures and what
Hmm.
they look like when they come out. Because what I tend to do with mine is it's sort of, I would say, very, very early spring. This is for us, around end of March. I'm taking that banana out. I'm putting it into a large plastic pot with soil so it can start to create stabilizing roots. And
Okay.
I'll then put a light over the top of it in the garage. You don't have to do this step. I do it to just try and get it going a little faster.
Okay.
I'll do that for 2 weeks, and then by that point, it's pushing up 2 or 3 leaves that are very uh, what's the word? They malnourished, anemic. That's the
Oh,
word I
okay.
want,
Okay.
because it's not quite enough light for it. Then
Yeah.
I'll bring those out and I'll put them into that shady position, so that they can start to realize what the real world looks like.
Hmm.
And they've got those nice stable roots, and those will sit there for about a week, and then they'll go out into the garden, and some of the newer leaves will scald a little bit, but that's okay. These are very quick
Yeah.
growing. They're going to push out new leaves. Um, and you can skip that whole middle step and just wait until it's warm outside, and then you can bring them out and put them directly into the soil. The reason that I put them into pots first is because I value those stabilizing roots. It's a larger root ball,
Right.
and so it's not so tempted to fall over in a windstorm or to go
Mm.
wonky, and I don't have to stake it.
Okay.
But you can 100% do it the other way if you wish. Just make sure that you've got a couple stakes on each side, to hold it in place for a little bit,
Okay.
until it can put those roots down.
Very cool. Well, now I want to try one of that species of banana.
Yeah.
They
Me
really are.
too.
There's no going back with those. I usually have 4 or 5 of them in my garage. That Mine are about 6 years old now, but that is also their problem, is the girth starts to get bigger and bigger. So
Yeah.
this plant that was a best friend because it was just so darn easy, now is a very serious high maintenance partner.
Yeah.
They are, probably about 50 kilos.
Uh,
I'm trying to get them into my truck and get them up to
yeah.
the garage. And
Mhm.
so this year I just kept one, and I'm
Okay.
going to start with smaller plants again. But they put on 6 feet in a season. It's extraordinary.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. And I do want to reiterate to our listeners about the book. Like you said, it's not just a pretty tropical picture book. Marianne has done a fabulous job of really practical advice, and your photos match, kind of what you're talking about. So this is really a resource guide. I mean, it's excellent. So I think especially for whether you're a new gardener, a new to houseplants, or experienced gardener and new to bringing houseplants outside into the garden, it's definitely a very valuable book. So I definitely want to speak to that. Like, you mentioned it in passing. It's not just a pretty book, and it is beautiful. The pictures are beautiful, but it's very practical. And I think that's really important to highlight.
Yeah, it was thank you very much. I appreciate that. It was important to me to be honest with
Mm,
people. I really want them going into this with their eyes wide open, not feeling like, oh, I messed up. Mine doesn't look like that. I want them to realize the good, the bad, the ugly, um, and realize that all of those three things are possible and
mhm.
often part of every plant experience. And it's so exciting when it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I mean,
Yeah.
these plants just rock the summer garden. Um, and that is during a period for us, especially down here in the Mid-Atlantic. We're very humid. All of our spirits are flagging by August. We're tired, drinking a lot
Mhm.
of rum punches, trying to keep the motivation high. And these plants just push through that season. They respond to it, and so they can be that sort of driving engine that can then reinvigorate all the other plantings that you have that are,
Mhm.
that are doing well, but needed a zest, right? They
Right.
needed a punch, and that's what I really love about them is
Okay.
they respond to the Jumanji part of the summer, and they
Yes.
respond well. They
Yeah.
settle in. That's when the dahlias are coming out looking
Yes.
amazing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I it that's what makes them worthwhile.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think too, it would maybe help people, because often as a garden designer, people want flowers. Like when they think of gardens and they want my help with their garden, they want to focus on flowers, which is fine. I mean, I love, my hydrangeas. Everybody knows how much I love those, and flowers. But everything looks better if with an evergreen or with a structured plant next to them, and not necessarily. And so I think of, when you talk about the Sansevieria, like my mind is just popping about because, we use ornamental grasses, but they can be kind of wimpy and they can be kind of problematic sometimes. And they can be a little, depending on which ones you use. So the thought of in a certain way, like even with a water feature next to a water feature or along around a pond, to be able to have something as structural and as reliable, really, because you know what you're getting, right, with a sense of area, and it would be happier outside. So I just think it has really changed my mindset. And you need to balance it. There's the big movement with native plants and plants for pollinators. So, I mean, it's all about, the whole ecosystem that you're creating. And
Yes.
and there really can be a great place for those types of plants, tropical plants in our gardens.
Absolutely. And I like to use them specifically in young gardens
Mm.
because they give you that structure, that immediacy, while your other temperate shrubs are still little babies. Because remember, I'm a cheapskate. I've got little tiny shrubs that are getting bigger, and
Mhm.
then you can slowly move out so that you have a real tropical looking area of your garden, which has got all these baby temperates underneath it getting bigger, and then it's slowly morphing into more of a temperate garden with just a few tropical accents. They can do that because they're so architectural. And you were saying ornamental grasses. I think ornamental grasses, some of our temperate ornamental grasses, pair so beautifully with the strong
Mhm.
forms of the foliage of tropical and subtropical plants
Mm,
because they
yes.
soften those lines. and
Yeah.
and hydrangeas,
Mhm.
caniculatas particularly, they give that sort of frill and fun along with that bold foliage. And then you
Yes.
add a grass in there, that's the Holy Trinity. It is
Yeah.
absolutely beautiful.
We are reaching the last 4 or so minutes of the show. So I think it's time to kind of wrap up, but I think we've had a wonderful conversation. Lots of amazing information. Thank you so much, Marianne. I think our listeners are probably going to be asking and wondering, where can we find this amazing book?
Well, it is available at all booksellers online. Those big ones, the Barnes and Nobles, the Amazons. It's hopefully available at your local bookseller. Check there
Okay.
too. If you want an autographed copy, I am very happy to do that. You can find that at my website, www.smalltowngardener.com, and I'd be very happy to send you a personalized message or to somebody that you know. I'm happy to do that too, but you can find it through all of those. And if you do get it on some of the big um, on some of the big sites, please leave a review for the book,
Okay.
because those are so helpful for other people finding it.
Yes, they definitely are.
Yes, for sure. Is there anything else, anywhere else our listeners might be able to find you? Are you on social media
I am.
beyond? And
Uh, Limited, but I'm there. I've got a big garden to take care of.
yes,
I'm on Instagram at Small Town Gardener, and I'm on Facebook at The Small Town Gardener. And
Okay.
you can find me writing at GardenRant.com, which is a lot of fun. I heartily recommend it to people
Yes.
who have got a lot of how to do stuff, and now they want to know the why to and the stories and the fun and the rants and that type of thing. And I also write a column, an opinion column for the American Gardener. It's the American Horticultural Society's flagship magazine. So that's where you can
Good.
find me.
lots.
Excellent. And that'll all be in our show notes as well. So that's perfect.
Exactly. Lots of great places to find and learn more from Marianne. So thank you so much for joining us on the show and taking us through your latest book, Tropical Plants and How to Love Them, on this Valentine's Day evening. We hope you all have a wonderful night. Just quickly looking ahead on some of our upcoming shows, tune in next week. We are going to repeat our show, Dave's Air Plant Corner with David Lynn. He will rejoin us on the show. Don't forget, he can ship his plants to all of you. So check out that repeat as well. And then we're going to round out our houseplant month with one of our popular Ask Us Anything episodes. So get your questions ready and send them here to instudio101@gmail.com. Don't forget, you can also, if you have more questions for Marianne, sorry, about tonight's topic, you can also write us here at instudio101@gmail.com. And don't hesitate to reach out to Marianne directly. You can find her again at www.smalltowngardener.com with all of our social media links there, and a way to purchase directly this fantastic, very informative, fantastic resource. I know it's got a spot on my shelf for sure. So
Thank you, Matthew.
thank you. And thank you again for joining us here on the show. So I think that wraps us up for this evening. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Down the Garden Path here on Reality Radio 101.